Irish team as a youngster, and risked his sort of running foul of selectors and so on by not going. But I think in the middle of that shitstorm, it was horrible. It was horrible, horrible, horrible. And to have people pointing at you and people, I won't figuratively spitting at you. And I think being disappointed was the point. And I look back and I'm massively disappointed in myself, because here was an ethical decision. And I went against what I knew was right. And that hurts me. And in a funny way, you can actually compare it with when I was on radio here, things got very, very tense.
I was going to say,
and I had some death threats against me. And there was one of the worst apartheid assassins in South Africa, a guy by the name of Eugene de Kock, who came out of jail about 2 years ago. He was known as Prime Evil. He served 20 years in jail. And he told me that he was told to shoot me, to assassinate me, and there were other things to be shot, and
but you did have protection for a while, didn't you? And bodyguards, didn't you?
Yeah, no, not at all, not at all. There'd be occasionally after a threat, there'd be because I don't think people realize quite how serious it was till afterwards. But my point is this: I look at that where I should have been more worried about it. And my family and my kids suffered at school with, kids can be cruel and comments about your dad and my wife and things like that. And yet at that time, I wore those like a badge of honor. It was cathartic. I was standing up for what I knew was right. And in a funny sort of a way, I think because, I was much more politically aware, but I'm not making that as an excuse. I was still wrong to tour South Africa. But in a funny sort of a way, I found that almost cathartic, that here I could take a brave, unselfish decision. I could put myself out there and stand up and be counted.
Yeah.
Whereas I didn't those years ago in the rugby. So again, to go back to my sort of theme or my view of my life as chapters, those were sort of different chapters. And sometimes I look back on it now, terrified. When you look at and I remember Eugene de Kock speaking to him. And I said to him, because the police told him to assassinate me with a crossbow. Can you imagine that?
Wow.
I was to be shot with a hunting crossbow in order to send a message to people who were having a go at the apartheid regime. And I said to him, but I'm still here. And he said, no, I didn't shoot people because they were on the radio. I shot people because they were planting bombs against the regime. And I remember saying, once I'd recovered my breath, I remember saying to him, but if you hadn't had that view, would I be dead? He said, absolutely. And I said, would you have shot me with a crossbow? He said, no, you'd have been a victim of crime. And it just made me think the number of victims of crime who actually were people who were assassinated by the, secret army and police sort of dirty squads is quite extraordinary. But even talking to you now, Ross, it seems like a different world away.
Yeah, but did you realise at the time how close to the edge you were living? I mean, we used to hear, I had a few people who I knew who lived in South Africa, so we used to say, you won't believe what John was talking about. Because you were ahead of your time. You were more than Joe Duffy was here, equivalent. You were very polemic. You were very open. You did put yourself up there.
I did. And I mean, I was honest. And as I say, looking back on it now,
people don't get medals for honesty. And you're very brave to be honest. You know what I mean? There's a lot of people who are honest and are not here anymore. Honesty has a limited value when you're speaking against the establishment and secret forces.
Ross, I had Archbishop Tutu on as a guest, and he became a particular friend of mine. Yeah. He was the most, I mean, even, Mandela, but my real hero was Tutu, because no matter what, and he was a brave, brave man and stood up, and he could, and Mandela, but they could always have a sense of humor. They always looked at the best side in people, no matter the dreadful things that were happening. And yet they were tough. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. They were tough people. But I remember after my show, Desmond Tutu looked at me and said, you don't have a show, you have a mission.
Yeah.
And I remember my arm, the hairs of my arms went up. And I think even more so than being told to shut up Mandela, that's maybe my proudest moment.
And did you meet Stephen Biko? Or was he?
Oh, Stephen Biko was dead before I came.
There's some classic characters who were braver than brave, weren't they?
Absolutely. And there was, name is gone now, David, academic. who was shot by a murderer called Ferdy Barnard,
Oh, yeah, I
and
remember
another
that.
guy who were rugby players. And I played rugby against them. And I remember, funnily enough, the night of the World Cup semi-final in '95, I was commentating for RTE. They very kindly asked me to be a guest commentator, and I was flying back after the England-New Zealand semi-final, the one where Jonah Lomu ran riot and scored 4 tries. And I ended up sitting beside one of these apartheid killers, one of the guys who'd been an apartheid killer. I won't give his name. And we had a chat. And I said to him, I said, look, there's a level of forgiveness now in this country, but people just want to know what happened. And he said, well, look, I don't know what to do, what this, that. And I said, why don't you go and tell Mandela, do it and say to him, this is how I grew up. This is what I was told. These are some of the things that I have done. And I'm deeply sorry for it, which was the view he expressed. And we had this great chat, 2 hours from Cape Town to Joburg. And then as we were saying goodbye, he just turned to me and said, John, this conversation never took place. In other words, there was still that fear. There was still those different emotions that went through. But looking back, I mean, I've lived incredible times. I've seen incredible people and met incredible. But the greatest thing is living, and when you're on talk radio, current affairs, you have this unique view of history because you're living through it.
Yeah.
And I suppose, and the other thing was, people look to me and say, how did you get there? This little Irish rugby player ending up here sort of in this incredible position. And the way I'd answer it is saying that in any other country, it wouldn't have worked. I mean, you look at, I don't know, Piers Morgan in America, he went over there and who is this arrogant brick telling people what to do, F off. And in the days of apartheid, the whole thing about apartheid was you were put into a pigeonhole. So if you were a white Afrikaner, you were put into that pigeonhole. This is basically what you believed and what you believed was right. If you were a Zulu from KwaZulu-Natal, this is where you were. If you were a Xhosa from the Eastern Cape, if you were an Indian from Natal, if you're a colored, but everybody was put into that little box. And then by total accident rather than design, and I told you how I ended up on doing sports radio, taking calls. And then because we basically had nobody else in the radio station, I got thrown on this graveyard shift. And then here's this sort of white rugby playing guy who's Irish, but he doesn't fall into what a white rugby player would mainly do. And he's loud and he's this and he holds people to account. And looking back on it, that was the real stroke of luck that I had. That it was the one time where nobody could put me into a pigeonhole. And as a result, people listened because it made compelling radio. Because it was, as well as what you were talking about and who you were talking to, it was, who the hell is this guy?
Yeah.
What does he feel? So again, as with rugby and so many things, I look back and say, thank goodness I had so much luck.
Yeah, but being an outsider enabled you to see things as well.
Exactly.
And you weren't compromised and nobody knew where the hell Greystones was, nor did they care.
Well, I was, as I say, I was compromised because I'd come on rugby tours.
Yeah.
So for a vast majority of
you
people,
in your head were, but they didn't know who.
No. Of course, a lot of people knew. And another thing, for example, I mean, people used to say to me, now this was when the country was on a knife edge, Rasa.
Yeah.
The country could have gone to that scenario, the low road scenario I talked about rather than the high road scenario. And people, especially white South Africans, used to say, you bloody Robbie, you bloody Irishman, you can always go home, you've got a passport. What about us? We're living here, you see. And they used to attack me with this. And I used to say, I'll get a South African passport the day they announced the first democratic election. And I did, and became a South African citizen in 1994. So there were sort of pluses and minuses on it, but I used it to my advantage. And caused a bit of a stir looking back, I must say. Sometimes to the owners of the radio station, I must say.
I was going to say, they might be pulling you aside and giving you a yellow card. And you hope you didn't tell Desmond Tutu to cut the slush, did you?
That thing comes back to haunt me. What happened? People say, what happened was, I mean, literally, we would say, good morning. It's like I was 6 to 9, the morning show for 17 years. And we'd say, morning, it's John Robbie here. Talk Radio 702. Nice to have you on board. The lines are open. and the lines would be open right throughout the show for 3 hours, you know? So you were there balancing your interviews, your comments on things, callers, adverts, news, information, weather.